I guess I would state that I run a direct-to-consumer subscription-based pet food startup. Very much as a startup. We launched about 2 years ago, but it's gone very well in Hong Kong, and we're now expanding to Singapore. So it's always quite a funny conversation, as my career's changed quite significantly. 3 years ago, I was working in real estate, or even 2 years ago. But I feel like I always wanted to start my own thing, and therefore managed to launch this startup just two and a half years ago. And now running that. So it kind of makes me pretty proud, to be honest, to be able to say that now I'm a founder of a startup. I would try and keep it less cheesy, though, if I was telling someone at a party or elsewhere. I often find myself telling people I work for a dog food business, but if they're friends, then I'll say I'm a founder.
Yeah, I asked that question because, like, for me in China and in Hong Kong, it's easy to say, like, I run a import-export business. But then when I'm outside of China, it's always a situation where people are like, okay, what is that? Are you a drug dealer? Like, what's going on? Like, so yeah, it's an interesting way to explain things. But
moving into another market is, as you say, opening up more of a larger addressable market. There's definitely route to doing this through product as well. The way we kind of look at the cores of our business is we look at our acquisition costs, we look at our retention and our lifetime value of a customer, and our average order value. They're all kind of in the same mixing pot. We know fine well that product can help us with increasing market in terms of, let's go with a really simple one. We just spoke about a shadow boxing cat. Cat food is a pretty obvious next step at some point for us. And we know that it's a big market in Hong Kong. We know it's actually pretty similar to dog. We know we've got the ability and infrastructure to build it out. At some stage, it seemed inevitable that we should add that. Aside from that, if you look at keep it also siloed on dog, one of our, like, a very common churn rate or churn reason is taste. Much like humans, pets obviously have their own taste, and if we had one product, we're not going to cover the entire market. We just recently launched a salmon and sweet potato recipe. We had one of our best months. In fact, I think it was our best month. So we know fine well launching new products will A, open up more of the market, and B, reduce our churn rate because people have other options. So in the short run, I think we'll be looking to launch a wet food topper, as you mentioned, kind of a taste enhancer, probably one more treat SKU, and then one more dry food SKU. We're now working, or we are working with a nutritionist in the US who's been super helpful from the start, and spending more and more time speaking with her, making sure that we have that product portfolio really nailed on. It's, I guess, the case of any early stage startup. The working capital costs of product are quite intensive, so we didn't want to jump the gun, and we want to make sure we were bringing the right product at the right time. But we feel that we've probably got another 2 or 3 products that we want to add in the next 6 to 9 months that we think will benefit the business.
I was just going to ask, like, what were some of the early business struggles, and how did you overcome?
I think the most obvious early struggle was, there was a piece that obviously we were both working full time, and therefore allocating aside from Buddy Bout. So myself and Chris were working full time at other jobs, and therefore allocating time was challenging. We were both passionate enough about it, and we loved it enough that we found we just made time, whether it be weekends, mornings, or evenings. We just found the time. But one thing was, inevitably we had to learn a lot of things very quickly. For the most part, I think we did a good job. One thing we struggled at was supply chain. I think it kind of came to a head where it was something we were new to. It was something we were trying to learn fast. Hong Kong generally, I think, is a little bit backwards in terms of its supply chain management or inventory management software. And this alongside.
Oh, you definitely have to expand on that, but like finish your point first, and then I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure, yeah. So I guess the inventory management software or use of software or lack of use of software is a better way you put it. Alongside significant delays due to the pandemic and Suez Canal 6-point turns, resulted in some pretty stressful times on the supply chain management side of things. People will always say, oh, you're running out of stock. That's a good problem to have. It is not a good problem to have if you run a subscription business. It's a pretty quick way to lose all your customer base. So there was a few times when I was like sat in my office at work, like trying to organize air freights or some sort of short-term solution to getting product into Hong Kong. And I think if like I came from a little bit of a finance background, and my model would look like, how do we have the least amount of stock on hand in Hong Kong at any one time, so we're not chewing up capital and cash and working capital. In hindsight, that it's not worth it. It takes too many years off your life being that stressed. I think later on, when you're developed, you can begin to work out how to efficiently run your supply chain in that way. But
well, just with the way the world is at the moment, it's impossible. Product is king at the moment. So if you have product in, you're going to sell it because everyone else is having the same problems. But trying to have that model where it's that rolling, everything's coming in month on month or every couple of months, and there's going to be no issues, is just not going to happen for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, the just-in-time buzzword has been kind of stamped out, hasn't it? I've not heard it in a while.
Yeah.
And I think back to your question on the supply chain management side, I think if you look at the US, well, not just the US, but the US is the best example, courtesy of Amazon and a number of others. The software and implementation of software within 3PLs, between third-party logistic businesses, is meticulous, and I think everything is run very, very smoothly. In the case of us, we use Shopify. I think most people will use a third-party API on Shopify to runway model all of their stock so they know when they need to reorder. First of all, we were poorly educated on this, so our inventory management through Shopify was poor, and then our 3PL was, I guess they're very good. We really are happy with them. They still work off an Excel spreadsheet, which blows my mind. Anytime a product goes in or out, they will tap one on an Excel spreadsheet, whatever column it may be. And therefore, we have to rely on lack of human error and also updates from humans in terms of stock monitoring. This, alongside the fact that it wasn't a full-time job, made things very challenging. I think we're beginning to get there. Some of the bigger boys in Hong Kong, like Kerry and stuff, I'm sure do this very well. But when you're early on in the startup,
I was just going to say it's improved an awful lot in the last 2 to 3 years from where it was.
But again, it's a startup, though. You're priced out, right? Like you need to be cost conscious, and you need to find people who are flexible. Like our fulfillment process, our pick and pack process is quite detailed, and the reason we make it detailed is because that's a way to differentiate against other pet food brands. But therefore, if you're only doing from day zero orders or one order, none of the big boys will ever pick you up. But you're right, it's definitely improving pretty quickly. And I think as e-com becomes more heavily, it's one of those two sides of the coin, right? It's one of the reasons why the opportunity is here, is that e-com isn't heavily adopted. The writing's on the wall, it will eventually be, and these infrastructures will improve day by day. But yeah, it's a stress you have to deal with at present.
That's really interesting because, like, I mean, obviously China was the first adopter of, like mainland China was the first adopter of e-com and stuff like that. So, I mean, they're really, really efficient with the way they handle, inventory management, shipping, all those things. So you would just assume that Hong Kong would be the same. So that's surprising to hear.
Hong Kong's in the 70s in most industries compared to China. You go over the border to Shenzhen, it's like being in the future. You can't hear the traffic because all the cars are electric and everything's card paid, no cash. And you come to Hong Kong and you get in a taxi here that hasn't been upgraded for 50 years. And they all look at you with 12 like it's bonkers. You would think it would be the other way around, but No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, when we first looked into it, which was 2019, 2020, there was a USDA report, and I think it was Euromonitor report on pet food in Hong Kong, and it claimed that 5% of pet food in Hong Kong was sold via e-commerce. So 95% of a heavy product which suits e-com was sold in shops in a place which has the most expensive real estate in the world. It makes no sense. And then you go like 45 minutes north and 70% of pet food is sold through e-com.
Yeah,
it's a bizarre place, Hong Kong.
I have very rarely bought dog food in shops. It's only been when it was an emergency. And it's always like through Lazada over here.
But I think kind of what you touched on earlier on, Ryan, about the helper culture here. So like a lot of people are like, our helper will get it. So I think that's also something. But now, like with the weight of it as well, because again, like a 25 kg bag of dog food is heavy for majority of women and majority
heavy for me, man.
Yeah. But especially when you're talking about like a small Indonesian or Filipino woman, like trying to lift something like that, it's not easy.
Yeah, there's a number of strange factors involved in Hong Kong. I think it's just a heavily monopolized place by a few big families that dominate the real estate space, which makes some very, very interesting lack of innovation and then innovation in certain spaces. But as again, like we were saying, there's two sides to the coin. It does mean that there is opportunity because of these blind spots or because of this lack of adoption in certain things. Like e-com's a great example. Like it's inevitable that e-commerce will be more heavily. Oh, you're already seeing it, right? Deliveroo, Food Panda, HKTV Mall, Nutrition Kitchen. Like they're all beginning to become. I mean, HKTV Mall is a great example. It's heavily adopted now, and I think 3-4 years ago they would have probably struggled on the customer acquisition piece.
For sure, and they've created a more premium version of it now as well. Can't remember the name of it. They were on to me recently about Earned, but they want to do like, basically a more premium version of HKTDC. So it's like, I think it's still a bit behind. People buying stuff online is still a bit behind in general, but it's growing pretty fast.
In general, with that, like, what is the reason why Hong Kong has been slow to kind of develop their e-commerce side of things?
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors. One of the factors that Alan just mentioned is the culture of having domestic help, I think, is definitely a significant knock-on effect. There's also a big piece, which is the flip side of real estate being very expensive and Hong Kong being dense, and therefore, in my mind, ripe for e-com. The devil's advocate would say it's dense, so why do you need e-com? Because you've got a 7-Eleven on your ground floor. And I think that's what 7-Eleven would argue. They would say, you can be stood in Hong Kong and be able to see like 4 7-Elevens from certain locations. There is very, very convenient shopping. It's just not that good quality from a consumer perspective in my eyes. So why change a winning format in many regards, I think is what a lot of people would view it is. Like the previous flat that I lived in, we had a supermarket, or a very small supermarket, within like 30 meters of our building. And there's probably about 100,000 people that would live within half a square mile of that supermarket. So the density of Hong Kong provides an opportunity for convenience in the form of bricks and mortar shops to stand as a pretty decent offering. But in the long run, I think whilst convenience of a 7-Eleven is good, getting it delivered to your door is more convenient, and that will always kind of trump the previous offering. And then I guess there's a number of other strange factors, like it's just a heavily dominated market by a number of very wealthy families or very wealthy private institutions that seem to control some of the logistics piece as well. And actually, quite interestingly, here's something. When we're speaking with a few people early on in Buddy Bites, from an investor perspective, speaking with VCs, they don't, for different consumer markets, as we were discussing earlier, they don't see Hong Kong as that big of a market to really get excited about. So if you're a VC in the US, or if you're a VC, a Chinese-based VC, and someone launches a cosmetics brand or a food brand in Hong Kong, even if that company takes, say, 10% market share, it's not going to move the needle for a big VC. So I think a lot of young VC capital for like young brands from VCs is hard to come by. So the innovation piece within the startup space is quite hard. Like you really don't see many. Singapore's a funny one, right? It's more route to the region, and there's lots of decent VCs there. But Hong Kong has a lot of private capital and a lot of funds, but very little venture capital. And I think that means not much capital flows into the entry point for startups in challenger brands.
I guess moving into sort of the closing questions, because I know we've been on for a while, but what are some of the skills that you found that have benefited you the most within the business and your business partner as well?
Sure. I think first of all, I'm very, very glad I started it with Chris. Both Chris specifically, I think he's been a huge asset, and also with a friend or with somebody else. It means you can lean on each other, for skill set gaps, and also just, I guess, looking at having a shoulder to cry on, or someone to discuss ideas or challenges with. In many ways, we're each other's therapists at some point.
Cry on Alan's shoulder
all the time.
It's important. You got to let it out. Then I think I'm generally quite a wide skill set. Like as I said earlier, I'm not like a superstar at any specific skill. And I think in some regards that's a good thing for an early stage startup. One thing I've found is that there was a huge steep learning curve in the first year, whether it be like Shopify apps, whether it be understanding marketing channels, marketing funnels, whether understand developing sites. And what I really tried to do, which I'm incredibly glad I did, is anything we outsourced, I would try and get a basic understanding of first. So whether it be designing a Shopify website, or whether it be Facebook ads, or whether it be inventory management, I would always spend a day or so really intently reading up on how to execute that myself. Quickly realized that I'm not capable, but at least I now understand it to some extent. And I think, first of all, that's great for your own skill set. And secondly, it means you're able to manage anybody doing it. It means that you're able to hold people accountable.
How do you know if that person is doing their job effectively if you don't know what we're doing?
Yeah. So I think that was maybe a benefit to the fact that I was already, there was an aspect of jack of all trades to me. And then, I think the flip side is finding a partner if you are going to do it with somebody, which I would heavily advise, who fills in those gaps. There's not a single person on the planet who's capable of launching a massive brand on their own. There's nobody who's done it without a lot of luck and a lot of help. So finding those two things is important. And a co-founder is an easy way to get a lot of help early on.
What's the one thing that you've done, the smallest thing that you've done that's brought you the biggest results? So the 80-20 principle, the 20% that's brought you 80% of actual results.
So the one, this is a very, very small thing, I think, that has brought us a lot of results. And it comes, I suppose, from trying to improve the shopping experience. And that's personalization. So personalization of product offering. The easiest example for me to give here is we data capture when you check out on our site, name, first name, surname, dog's name. And then we put a sticker on the dogs, on the food packaging with the dog's name on it. And it is the tiniest thing, the easiest thing to do, but you would never get it in store. If you go to a shop, it's impossible for that to occur. And it seems personalized. Well, it is personalized. And I think we get a huge response from that affluent pet consumer that is hugely excited to see their dog's name on packaging. To kind of build on that, we also include welcome boxes that are surplus to what people have ordered themselves, so free gifts essentially. So essentially doing things that is that old term of doing the unscalable things early on, because big brands can't compete. So being able to personalize the product in a way that other brands can't do, I think is a relatively, well, it's been a massive win for us, and it wasn't a huge amount of brain space to do it.
I was reading recently about when Coca-Cola did the names on the bottles, and I can't remember what the stats were, but the sales that generated were phenomenal. And it, like, obviously that's a different level, right? Because they're putting names on every single bottle, but that's where you want to try and get to, right? That type of personalization, because it's amazing how much it means to someone, like you were saying with the gift boxes and having that card that's handwritten. It's time consuming and it's difficult to do, especially in Hong Kong. If you're not near your 3PL, if you're like your 3PL is in new territories and you've got to travel out there, it's obviously time consuming unless they offer that service as well, which is always useful. But it makes a big difference to the consumer side of things.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The way I kind of look at it, right, is customer service and personalization. Think of it as like a good waiter in a restaurant. If you walk away from a good waiter in a restaurant, your experience of the food skyrockets. It's got nothing to do with the food, but 100%. You look back on that experience far better.
Especially in Hong Kong, because that very rarely happens.
You're always an optimist.
I think the title of the podcast would be doing the things that are unscalable early. I really like that quote. So you have a quote now, Ryan Black quote. One thing I wanted to ask is, what is something that you believe that is other people, when you say it out loud, other people think it's crazy? Could be business, could be life in general,
One thing that I feel like this is situation specific to where I am, but I think it needs a bit of praising. I think a lot of people are super negative on Hong Kong at the moment because of pretty obvious factors with restrictions. But having been away for the summer and then come back, like I still kind of look at this place as a pretty sensational city. It's changing and it's frustrating, certain things that are happening, but it's still a phenomenal place to live. It's still a beautiful city. I kind of feel like the city gets bad press for the wrong reasons at the moment. And I feel like as soon as it opens up, it deserves to get the visitors that the city deserves, because it's a great place.
I mean, I have to get back to Hong Kong. I want to experience it and see how it is right now. But yeah, definitely. Over the past couple of years with the protests and COVID, a lot of people have been a little bit negative. What are 3 books or podcasts or vlogs that you would recommend to people to understand better? Just 3, doesn't have to be 3 of everything.
Sure. First one, I guess I just finished a book called Alchemy by Rory Sutherland, who's a partner at Ogilvy and Mather. He was on the Diary of a CEO recently, the podcast, and I think I've actually weirdly enough never came across him previously, but a fascinating thinker. He's a marketing guy, but actually really he's a behavioral psychologist. I think he thinks about how people tick, and then I guess if you want to be cynical about it, manipulates that. I think he was actually the one it was his team that came up with the names on the Coca-Cola cans. Oh, really? You mentioned earlier.
Yeah, a brilliant podcast that he was on. He's very toffee, like very English rah character.
He's just like a against the grain thinker, but a very, very intelligent one, and in a humorous way. He following that, listen to that podcast. If you want an entry point into it, it's Diary of the CEO, the Stephen Bartlett's podcast, and his name's Rory Sutherland. And then I read his book called Alchemy, which is very good. I've not listened to it in a while, but How I Built is an American podcast about startups. This is very specific on, I think, the startup that you're listening to or the founder that you're listening to. But the guy who does the podcast, Guy Raz, does it very well. And if you find brands that you like within it, then it's well worth a listen. The Dollar Shave Club one's very good because the Dollar Shave Club founders are obviously very successful, but also very, very funny. So it's a good listen. And then most recently, I've been listening to, this is quite an intense one. It's called Acquired. It's 2 guys, one's an angel investor and one's a VC. And they basically go from start to finish on some of the biggest brands globally. So recently they did Walmart, Amazon, they've done Sequoia Capital, but they're like 3 or 4 hour podcasts, and they tell the story of inception to now. And I think it's quite a funny way to look at business, right? People from an outside perspective look at business as like product, like money, shareholders, stakeholders, when like businesses are stories, right? Like when you're in them and you're at the start, like you go through some ups and downs. It's like Wozniak and Steve Jobs in like a garage at the start, and then at the end it being where it is today. And they'll do it far better than I do, but the two of them, I think it's Ben Gilbert and David Rosenthal, they tell the stories of these initially startups, now behemoths, incredibly well. So if you find a business that you like within their podcast, that's one I'd heavily advise.
And then I would say that last question, what is the best way for people to find you?
If they want to find Buddy Bites, then go on, probably Instagram's the best route actually, at buddybites.dog. And then me, I guess LinkedIn is probably the best route. Search Ryan Black on LinkedIn. I've very recently got Twitter, but I feel like it's not quite found its feet in Hong Kong yet, Twitter. I know it's heavily adopted in the US, but
your Buddy Bites content would be good on Twitter.
You reckon?
Yeah, I really like Rico. Their LinkedIn stuff is very good. I've gotten very disheartened with LinkedIn recently. I think it's a lot of peacocking and tapping yourself on the back type of posts. And the Buddy Bite stuff is very humorous and self-deprecating. It's their work. It's worth a follow. Funny. By all accounts, their intern does everything.
Yeah, I've no idea what you're talking about.
Also, is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you want to talk about?
I don't think so. I think if you're if you're happy with that, I think I am. I don't think anything too significant now.
Cool.
All right, cool, man. Thanks, Ryan. This is a really fascinating interview. Really enjoyed it. And of course, for the audience, if you want to reach out to us, Alan at sourcefindasia.com, Rico at sourcefindasia.com, info at sourcefindasia.com as well. And we have the Sourcefind Asia YouTube channel and the podcast media channel. And of course, we have a Discord. Join the Discord. It's really important for any of the people that are out there that want to have a community in the manufacturing space. The Discord is the #1 place for that. Cheers.
All right. Cheers, Ryan.
Thank you very much, guys. Cheers.